Rivers said that Michelle Obama was a man before she died.
Was that a joke? I thought it was a joke.
I thought it was a joke too, but the way she said it wasn't like jokey. She was like, oh, come on, everybody knows Michelle Obama's the man. Like, remember that?
Yeah, like, would Big Mike kill you for that?
Well, I think she died because she had 1,000 plastic surgeries. But
yeah, she was going under.
Yeah.
She just sees these big black arms coming over her face. Big Mike.
Bro.
They blame gender for her surrender. This week, Michelle Obama scolded female Trump supporters in front of an audience at a business conference in Boston, a city in Massachusetts. She said the former First Lady, quote, "Any woman who voted against Hillary Clinton voted..."
What if everything you thought you knew about Michelle Obama, was just a brand? From kale crusades to conspiracy theories. From million-dollar memoirs to political whispers, Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld just tore the mask off America's favorite First Lady. And trust me, after this, you'll never see her the same again. Forget the sanitized fairy tales and rehearsed speeches. Michelle Obama just collided head-on with the no-holds-barred commentary of Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld. But this wasn't your average jab. It was an unfiltered, surround sound reality check with razor-sharp humor and zero tolerance for performative politics. They cut through the high-gloss image-making, the curated snapshots, and the ever-present healthy eating lectures. No sparkle, no soft landings, just a brutally honest dissection that shook the polished persona of the former First Lady like a storm tearing through a carefully tended White House garden. For years, Michelle Obama has occupied a unique cultural perch, lauded as a fashion icon, a role model, a motivational speaker, and a quiet political force. But with that pedestal comes a certain immunity to criticism, a resistance to honest scrutiny that would be unthinkable for most public figures. Rogan and Gutfeld decided to challenge that immunity. They didn't just question the narrative, they dismantled it with surgical sarcasm and biting insight. Refusing to be hypnotized by the polished optics and choreographed empathy. Their takedown wasn't petty, it was pointed. They weren't mocking the woman, they were interrogating the myth. They highlighted the contrast between message and reality, between the public image of sacrifice and service and the private reality of multi-million-dollar media deals, lavish residences, and carefully packaged personal anecdotes. It was less of a roast and more of a cultural audit. And once the question started, what has she really accomplished since leaving the White House? What tangible legacy remains? The answers proved more elusive than expected. Michelle's post-First Lady career has been framed as a continuation of her public service. But what service? Exactly. Her initiatives on healthy eating were noble in intent, but barely moved the needle in the long term. Her media presence is undeniable, but the substance behind the spotlight is often vague, emotional, and safe, more about vibes than vision. Rogan and Gutfeld were simply the first major voices to say it out loud. The Michelle Obama brand might be running on the fumes of nostalgia and polished rhetoric, and it's not just about Michelle. It's about what her rise post-White House says about our culture. We've reached a point where symbolism often trumps substance, where style and relatability can overshadow measurable outcomes, where a few well-timed Instagram captions, a best-selling memoir, and a Netflix documentary can build a platform stronger than a political record. Gutfeld, always tuned to hypocrisy in media narratives, pointed out the absurdity of near-universal adoration for someone who hasn't had to take a hard public position in years. Rogan, with his typical blend of comedy and confrontation, asked the uncomfortable question, is this influence, or is it just celebrity dressed in political language? In the end, their critique wasn't meant to destroy Michelle Obama. It was a reminder that no one, no matter how beloved, should be beyond questioning. Because real leadership isn't about walking through rooms to applause or making safe speeches on safe platforms. It's about standing in hard truths, making uncomfortable decisions, and doing more than selling inspiration. It's about doing the work, not just branding it.
I did it, where he repeated that lie about Donald Trump talking about white supremacists, saying they're very fine people on both sides. Let's play it.
Said that there were very fine people on both sides of a white supremacist rally.
You had some very bad people in that group, but you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. And you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay?
That's crazy. I have never seen that last part of it.
Will the Dems ever win again, as long as they keep hating men? Our video of the day is a 2-for-1 man-haters special. First up, Michelle trashes dudes while urging women to act more like them.
We're always hedging, because in the back of our minds, we weren't raised with the certainty of maleness that, kind of the confidence that young men in their...
If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future updates. Now, let's dive into a figure who's become more brand than public servant, Michelle Obama. Over the past decade, she has ridden a wave of celebrity that owes less to legislative impact and more to a finely tuned image machine. The evolution from First Lady to full-blown cultural icon wasn't accidental, it was a masterclass in strategic marketing, emotional storytelling, and the careful avoidance of controversy. Michelle Obama has become a symbol, but of what, exactly? That's the question commentators like Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld are starting to ask. And it's a fair one, because while her post-White House career has been showered with applause, most of that praise stems from her presence, not her policy. Her influence doesn't come from reform or leadership in difficult issues. It comes from her ability to make people feel something hopeful, empowered, nostalgic, without ever needing to deliver measurable outcomes. She's managed to transform kale, yes, kale into a cultural lightning rod. What started as a well-intentioned initiative to promote healthy eating in schools evolved into a national debate about government overreach, taste, and class. School children across the country watched pizza slices and chocolate milk disappear, only to be replaced by limp carrot sticks and quinoa. The effort was billed as a public health campaign, but for many, it felt like a PR maneuver disguised as policy, symbolic action with little follow-through once the headlines faded. Then there's the dancing. From TV appearances to YouTube challenges, Michelle's playful moves became her signature, not because they communicated substance, but because they showed relatability. And in an era where charisma often outweighs competence, those carefully choreographed moments were gold. But when dance routines become political statements and hashtags become substitutes for hard positions, it's fair to wonder, are we mistaking charm for change? The quotes, too, are everywhere, stitched into merchandise, plastered on mugs, immortalized in memes. Her words are warm, broad, and intentionally nonspecific. The kind of polished encouragement you might find in a daily affirmation app. When they go low, we go high became a slogan, but not a strategy. These feel-good phrases are catchy, but they don't tackle complexity. They soothe, they don't solve. At this point, Michelle Obama is just one Instagram caption away from bottling air and branding it as hope in a jar. And the wild part. People would buy it not because they believe it contains something tangible, but because of what the label represents. Her name alone has become shorthand for poise, progress, and positivity, whether or not those qualities are rooted in real-world accomplishments. This isn't to say she hasn't inspired people, she has. But inspiration without action is like fireworks, bright, loud, and gone in seconds. And yet, she continues to command the stage, not for what she's doing now, but for how well she manages the image of having once done something important. In the end, Michelle's celebrity is a fascinating reflection of the times, a blend of social media savvy, nostalgia for the Obama era, and our collective thirst for reassuring figures in uncertain times. But when the applause dies down and the filters fade, we have to ask, is she leading or just branding leadership? Because there's a difference and we're starting to see it.
Thinks American men suck.
Let me warn you, your rage does not exist in a vacuum. If we don't get this election right, your wife, your daughter, your mother, we as women will become collateral damage to your rage. To the women listening, we have every right to demand that the men in our lives do better by us.
What's that pitter-patter sound I'm hearing in the background? It's the footsteps of Barack running to vote for Trump.
Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld didn't settle for a simple roast. They shattered the spotlight and turned it back on Michelle Obama's carefully constructed public persona. What they delivered wasn't some half-hearted jab or edgy for shock value. It was a full-scale deconstruction, driven by one simple but powerful question that too few in the mainstream media ever dare to ask. What, exactly, has she done lately? Not in terms of speeches, appearances, or branded optimism, but in real, measurable impact. Because for all the glamour and glowing magazine covers, Michelle Obama has become more symbol than stateswoman. Rogan and Gutfeld pierced through the stage lighting to expose how little substance lies behind the celebrity sheen. With sharp wit and a refusal to tread lightly around sacred figures, they called out the glaring contradictions in her narrative. While much of the public fawns over her poise and storytelling, they pointed out that behind those feel-good anecdotes and curated memoir pages is a record that feels oddly empty. Let's be honest, when the biggest talking point of your post-White House years is how emotionally exhausting it was to be universally adored by the media, the disconnect becomes hard to ignore. Michelle often frames her time in the public eye as a burden, one filled with painful scrutiny, invisible labor, and emotional sacrifice. And sure, public life is never easy. But that narrative loses a bit of weight when it's told from the guest house of a multi-million-dollar property. Following a Netflix pitch meeting and a private flight to a sold-out speaking event, Rogan and Gutfeld weren't trying to diminish her former role or erase her influence. They were asking why that influence has remained so disproportionately high when actual political contributions have been conspicuously low. She isn't passing legislation. She isn't engaging in diplomacy. She isn't leading movements from the front lines. And yet, she's treated like a towering voice in the political landscape, as if her cultural relevance automatically translates into civic leadership. That's the crux of their critique. The media industrial complex has created an unspoken rulebook where some figures are beyond reproach. For Michelle Obama, the applause has outlasted the performance. She's been elevated to icon status, not because of what she continues to do, but because of who she was. And every time she steps back into the spotlight, the audience stands even when she hasn't said anything particularly bold, meaningful, or new. In a political climate that demands clear voices and principled stands, she offers neither. Instead, she provides warmth, reassurance, and a comforting presence. But as Rogan and Gutfeld made clear, that kind of influence is hollow without action. Being beloved is not the same as being brave. And in their eyes, Michelle Obama has mastered the former while skillfully dodging the latter. So, when they asked what she's actually done recently, it wasn't meant to provoke, it was meant to reveal. The silence that followed that question said more than any slogan ever could.
Kids, were they private or public? Like, when was that? When he was a senator?
I don't know. I just know that
Like, he was a senator, right?
Yes,
Before he became president.
for sure.
So
I don't-
what, law school,
yeah.
Senate?
I have no issue because I want to live. I have no issue with Big Mike. I don't care that they killed that sex slave in Martha's Vineyard. That's what happens to sex slaves. They drown in ponds. That's what happens. You fuck the ruling class, you drown a pond. That's what happens. If you get your little mouthy, you go into the pond. I don't have a problem with it. I have no problem. I think it's good. I actually think it's good. I think it makes our country fun. I think it makes us unique. I think Putin and them are scared of that shit.
They do it all the time.
I think Putin and the Chinese are like, you don't know what's going on there. Because they got people that maybe they're men, maybe they're women, we don't know.
Michelle Obama has spent the last decade not so much participating in public life as floating through it. A high-gloss celebrity persona propped up more by strategic PR than substantive contribution. She's elevated vegetables to a moral high ground, transformed dance routines into political theater, and spun bite-sized inspiration into a media empire. At this point, she's just a few hashtags away from bottling air and selling it as hope in a jar. But Joe Rogan and Greg Gutfeld weren't buying the packaging. They didn't just crack jokes, they held up a mirror to the curated Michelle Obama brand and asked a question most wouldn't dare whisper. What has she actually done lately? Other than narrate the hardship of being adored by the press while living in luxury, her recent contributions are hard to pin down. Let's be real. Her standout post-White House achievement, teaching the nation that vegetables exist. She waged an aggressive campaign on school lunches like they were the battleground of democracy, replacing pizza with quinoa and sodium with sadness. While the world was wrangling with crises, Michelle was overseeing a national kale crusade, one that had school kids longing for the sweet relief of salt. Even her personal anecdotes, like the podcast moment where she laments Barack's chronic lateness, seem oddly performative. Rogan couldn't resist. To him, Michelle isn't a political force. She's a TED Talk with limbs, always hovering, delivering digestible affirmations. While steering clear of anything messy, real, or brave, it's a brand with no backbone, and any critique is met with such reverence you'd think she cured cancer with kale and a jump rope. And when she insists she's just a private citizen, it rings hollow. As Greg Gutfeld pointed out, Nothing screams normal life like Netflix, mega deals, sold-out stadium tours, and memoir rollouts with bigger budgets than a Marvel blockbuster. She flirts with presidential ambition while claiming political fatigue, a performance of humility wrapped in designer branding. She wants the glow without the glare, the worship without the work. This is public neutrality rebranded as quiet power, a kind of strategic invisibility. She preaches equality while living on a throne built from bestsellers, streaming profits, and speaking fees that dwarf most people's annual income. Her stories of struggle hit with the emotional depth of a Whole Foods commercial. Hardship, in her world, is finding wilted arugula aboard a private jet. When Michelle questioned why so many women chose to support a male candidate over her preferred pick, she suggested it reflected internalized bias, but maybe, just maybe, it reflects disillusionment with scripted sincerity. After all, nobody actually likes the sound of their own voice. We all cringe at voicemails. The difference is, most of us don't build empires on ours. Greg wasn't sold on the woe is me narrative either. She spent more time detailing how hard it was to be first lady than most Americans spend working triple shifts. And let's not forget, she wasn't scorned, she was celebrated. The press adored her. Late-night comedians worshipped her. Vogue would have turned a tumble into a symbol of resilience. And yet, Michelle still paints herself as an exile in political Siberia, armed with nothing but a blender and a dream. This persistent victimhood, coming from someone handed a national spotlight and using it to scold America over snack choices, feels less like leadership and more like performance. Struggling writers pour their souls into novels that never see daylight, while Michelle's reflections are treated like sacred texts, packaged, published, and promoted like wartime memoirs. Even Barack couldn't escape the re-examination. A resurfaced college letter revealed his musings about having an androgynous mind, imagining intimacy with men. Rogan found irony in the contrast, a woman who relentlessly guards her privacy. Right before cashing in on another blockbuster deal, her secrecy has become her brand. She could publish a blank journal called My Private Truths and it would still top the bestseller lists. Greg skewered the double standard. Michelle can utter generic calls for unity, and it's treated like diplomatic genius. Meanwhile, anyone remotely conservative who sneezes wrong becomes a trending scandal. The whole Michelle phenomenon is so finely produced that you almost miss the fact that underneath it all, there's very little substance. Her boldest stance, liking a vaguely political tweet. Her deepest insight, things are complicated. Hard positions, no policy vision, just vibes, mood board mantras, and pre-approved emotions. She's less a political figure and more a walking horoscope, universally palatable. Occasionally profound, but mostly designed to make everyone feel good and think little. Then came the internet's wilder corners where conspiracy meets comedy, jokes about Big Mike, absurd speculation, and chaotic banter took over. Even in that absurdity, there's a strange commentary. Michelle Obama is a cultural Rorschach test. To some, she's a role model. To others, she's the symbol of elite detachment. But in all cases, she's curated, calculated, and never far from the headlines. And that's the point. Michelle never fully enters politics, but she never truly leaves it either. Just close enough to influence, far enough to dodge scrutiny. She seeks the spotlight, but not the responsibility. The applause, but not the accountability. As Greg quipped, she could tweet drink water and CNN would break into live coverage. In the end, Michelle Obama has mastered the art of making common sense look revolutionary. And that, perhaps, is the greatest performance of all. And here's the wildest part, people buy it. They eat it up like it's groundbreaking, when really, it's just PR and pearls. Greg Gutfeld didn't mince words. Once you peel away the documentaries and bestsellers, Michelle Obama's most tangible political legacy is making cafeteria food just a little more depressing. That's it. No sweeping reforms. No lasting initiatives. Just fewer condiments, more celery sticks, and a whole lot of headlines. Somehow, she exited the White House with more political clout than lawmakers who actually wrote and passed legislation. Her secret: do less. Say less but look like you're doing everything. A few careful speeches, a stylist who never misses, and an uncanny ability to avoid controversy like it's a food allergy. If that's the new bar for influence, it's not just low, it's buried deeper than her husband's forgotten stimulus plan. Even the Obamas' personal lives have become fair game for speculation. Divorce rumors swirl. And rather than brush it off, Rogan quipped, hopefully, they settle it like men. Crude, sure, but it hit a nerve. Because this isn't about cruelty, it's about cutting through the illusion. Joe Rogan nailed it. What we're watching is political performance art. Michelle is the star of the longest-running TED Talk in history, and America just keeps clapping, unsure if anything meaningful was actually said. She's mastered the art of resonating without revealing, of leaving people moved, but unable to explain why. Gutfeld took it a step further, calling out the media's obsession with everything she touches. A blurry photo of her dog would be treated like it held clues to solving Middle East peace. Meanwhile, anyone else who speaks unscripted is labeled unpolished or dangerous. The double standard isn't just absurd, it's damaging. At this point, Michelle Obama is more product than person. Her biggest moments are pre-approved and pre-packaged for maximum applause. No sharp edges, no tough truths, just soft focus, empathy and trendy concern. And yet, we're told this is leadership. It isn't, it's theater. Rogan didn't hold back during the DNC, calling out the irony of Michelle delivering speeches on income inequality while sitting on a net worth high enough to fund a small nation. He pointed to an old story she once told about her grandmother distrusting those who take more than they need. The punchline: the Obamas own 4 homes. That's not just contradiction, it's cognitive dissonance on a silver platter. So, Rogan and Gutfeld didn't attack Michelle. They dissected the myth piece by curated piece. They laughed at the contradictions, the artificial polish, and the blind devotion to someone whose boldest political act in recent memory was ... rebranding, carrot sticks. It wasn't cruelty, it was honesty, and frankly, someone needed to say it, because beneath the branding, Michelle Obama isn't a bold visionary. She's an elite figurehead coasting on nostalgia, soft lighting, and the echo chamber of uncritical praise. But the shine is cracking. The message stays vague. The praise stays loud. But now, people are starting to see through the glow, because when the glitter fades, all that's left is the record, and it's thinner than a kale chip in a school lunch tray. And just when you think she's reached the peak of self-glorification, she climbs higher. Michelle Obama is the only person who can wear a designer pantsuit, fly private, and still brand herself as the voice of the oppressed without flinching. But reality has a funny way of catching up. According to a recent poll, Michelle Obama isn't the unbeatable Democratic contender the headlines suggest. In a hypothetical matchup against Donald Trump, he leads with 47% to her 44%. Looks like the generation that grew up on her school lunch reforms is finally old enough to vote, and they haven't forgotten the broccoli. Meanwhile, Joe Rogan, laughing because he's seen wild elk with more grounded post-White House arcs. And Greg Gutfeld, still wiping away tears, not from emotion, but from the absurdity of watching someone paid millions to talk about how exhausting it is to be adored. Michelle Obama has perfected the art of being iconic simply for existing. She doesn't need to deliver groundbreaking ideas, propose daring reforms, or even take a clear position. All it takes is a single glance, a raised eyebrow, a thoughtful pause, a well-angled photo, and headlines ripple across the internet like she just solved global warming. The media treats each gesture as gospel, as if she's discovering fire every time she smiles. Meanwhile, behind the curtain, she's dining on Wagyu burgers and truffle fries, likely paired with vintage wine, all while urging everyday Americans to eat more kale and cut back on sodium. The contrast between the image and the reality isn't just ironic, it's downright acrobatic. It takes Olympic-level mental gymnastics to promote moderation while living in decadent abundance, to preach simplicity while wearing $3,000 pantsuits on private jets. But Michelle pulls it off with finesse because the brand is bulletproof, the packaging too polished to question. Somewhere, right now, she's likely mapping out a global speaking tour on humility, with front row seats going for $1,200, an inspirational bookmark included in your swag bag, and maybe even a complimentary guilt trip about your carbon footprint for choosing regular milk over oat. And still, the show goes on. There's always a new quote, a new podcast appearance, a new capsule clothing collection in soft neutrals and empowering slogans. The speeches are vague enough to resonate, stylish enough to trend, and just safe enough to avoid any ideological risk. It's not leadership, it's theater, a well-rehearsed act that keeps selling out. But thanks to Rogan and Gutfeld tearing back the velvet curtain, the illusion isn't as seamless as it used to be. More people are beginning to squint at the fine print, to question the substance behind the sparkle. This isn't evolution, it's a costume change. And the performance of perfection continues. one carefully curated standing ovation at a time.